3 men crossed a hostile border at dusk. No rifles. No sidearms. No body armor. No communications equipment that could be traced to any Western military. One carried a leather satchel with a notebook and 2 ballpoint pens. Another carried a small camera, hidden inside a cigarette packet. A piece of tradecraft so old it belonged in a Cold War museum. The third carried absolutely nothing. Just the clothes on his back, a money belt filled with local currency, and a mental map of a city he had never physically entered, but could navigate blindfolded, built entirely from months of studying satellite imagery, human intelligence reports, and hand-drawn sketches provided by assets already on the ground. These 3 men walked into a city where 4 of the world's most powerful intelligence agencies had been hunting a single man for over a year. A man responsible for moving weapons, explosives, and trained operatives across borders that were supposed to be sealed. The Americans had thrown satellites at the problem. The Israelis had deployed electronic surveillance technology so sensitive it could detect the vibration of a human voice through a solid concrete wall from 40 meters away. The Jordanians had run agent networks through the region for months. All of them had come up empty. The target was a ghost. These 3 British soldiers found him in 11 days. No shots fired. Not a single electronic signal transmitted. Nobody in that city ever knew they were there. And when the intelligence report landed on the desk of a senior Mossad officer 3 weeks later, he did something that officers of Israel's most formidable intelligence agency almost never do. He picked up the phone and requested a meeting. Not a briefing. Not a liaison update. A meeting, with the men who had done it. Because he needed to understand how 3 unarmed men with nothing but notebooks had accomplished what a world-class technological apparatus worth hundreds of millions of dollars had failed to do. That phone call set in motion a relationship between 2 of the most secretive organizations on Earth, one that would quietly reshape how both nations approach the darkest corners of intelligence gathering for years to come. This is that story. To understand why this operation sent shockwaves through the intelligence communities of 3 continents, you have to understand the world it was born from. And you have to understand the unit that produced the men who walked into hostile territory carrying nothing but their training and their nerve. By the early 2000s, Western intelligence agencies were spending billions of dollars every year on signals intelligence, satellite surveillance, and electronic monitoring. The American intelligence budget alone exceeded $40 billion annually. The technological sophistication was staggering. Satellites could read license plates from orbit. Signals intercept platforms could capture and process millions of communications per day. Drones could loiter over target areas for hours, transmitting real-time imagery to analysts thousands of miles away. And yet, there remained targets that all of this technology could not find. Men who had learned, through bitter experience and careful study, how to become invisible to the electronic eye. Men who communicated by whisper and by courier. Men who moved on foot through crowds, who left no electronic signature for the vast surveillance apparatus to detect. Against such targets, the only sensor that worked was a pair of human eyes, attached to a brain that had been trained to observe, analyze, and endure at a level that no machine on Earth could replicate. The British Special Air Service had been building that human sensor for over 60 years. The British Special Air Service maintains a capability that no other military organization in the Western world has replicated at the same depth or with the same consistency. It is not their skill in close-quarters battle, though that skill is exceptional. It is not their marksmanship, though SAS operators fire more live rounds per year than virtually any other special forces unit on the planet. It is their capacity for sustained covert observation and infiltration in denied environments. A capability forged across 6 decades of continuous operational experience in some of the most hostile territories the modern world has ever produced. The roots of this capability reach back to the regiment's founding in the North African desert in 1941, when David Sterling, lying in a hospital bed in Cairo, sketched his vision for a unit of exceptional individuals who could operate deep behind enemy lines with minimal support. Sterling's original L detachment consisted of just 5 officers and 60 other ranks. Their first operation was a catastrophe. A parachute drop into Libya, launched in support of Operation Crusader, scattered men across the desert in high winds. Only 22 of the 64 who jumped made it back alive. Not a single shot had been fired at the enemy. But Sterling adapted. He abandoned parachute insertion in favor of ground approach, using vehicles from the long-range desert group. And on the next series of raids, small teams of 4 and 5 men destroyed over 60 enemy aircraft on the ground, without losing a single operator. By the time Sterling was captured in January 1943, the SAS had destroyed over 250 aircraft, dozens of supply dumps, and wrecked railways and communication lines across North Africa. Field Marshal Montgomery called Sterling quite mad, but acknowledged there was a place for mad people in war. Erwin Rommel gave him a different title, the Phantom Major. A man whose soldiers appeared from nowhere, struck with devastating precision, and vanished before anyone understood what had happened. That founding principle, appear from nowhere, strike, vanish before detection, became the genetic code of the regiment. It shaped everything that followed. Malaya. The 1950s. 4-man SAS patrols spent weeks deep in jungle, unseen, building relationships with indigenous populations while dismantling communist guerrilla networks that battalions of conventional infantry could not find. Borneo. The 1960s. Cross-border reconnaissance operations gathered intelligence so sensitive that the British government denied they were happening for decades. Oman. The 1970s. A handful of SAS soldiers, supported by locally recruited irregulars, defeated a Soviet and Chinese-backed insurgency that threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most strategically vital waterways on Earth. Each campaign added something to the institutional library of the regiment. Each environment demanded new skills, new adaptations, new ways of becoming invisible in terrain that no training manual had anticipated. But it was Northern Ireland that changed everything. From 1969 onward, the SAS and the covert surveillance units it trained, most notably the 14 Intelligence Company, conducted undercover operations in what was arguably the most surveilled and hostile urban environment in Western Europe. The streets of Belfast and Derry were not jungles or deserts. They were cities filled with ordinary people. And threading through those ordinary people were networks of paramilitary operatives who knew their neighborhoods with an intimacy that no outsider could replicate. Every face was catalogued. Every unfamiliar car was reported. Every stranger who lingered too long at a bus stop was noticed, questioned, and potentially killed. Into this environment, SAS operators learned to disappear. They grew their hair. They adopted local accents. They wore the same cheap anoraks and scuffed shoes as the men around them. They drove battered civilian cars, indistinguishable from the thousands on Belfast's rain-slicked streets. They sat in pubs and market stalls, watching, listening, sometimes for weeks, building pattern-of-life analyses on targets that no electronic surveillance could match. They learned to control every micro-expression, every unconscious glance, every instinctive reaction that might betray military training or intent. Think about that for a moment. A man walks differently when he is armed. His posture changes. His eyes move in patterns that trained counter-surveillance operators can recognize immediately. The SAS learned to walk like civilians. To slouch like civilians. To fidget and scratch and yawn like civilians. Because in a city where the wrong look at the wrong person could end in a kneecapping or a bullet to the back of the head, authenticity was not a luxury. It was survival. The 14 Intelligence Company operators, selected and trained by the SAS, became so proficient at blending into hostile communities that they could maintain observation posts within meters of IRA active service units for days without detection. Women served in 14 Intelligence Company, the first time women had been formally admitted to a UK Special Forces unit, because a woman sitting in a parked car on a Belfast street attracted considerably less suspicion than a man. The selection process was brutal. Out of 1,000 applicants for one selection course, only 17 were ultimately deployed to Northern Ireland. The unit was so secretive that its very existence was classified for years, hidden behind cover names like 4 Field Survey Troop, Royal Engineers, an administrative fiction designed to make intelligence operatives look like unremarkable support personnel. One exercise from the training pipeline required candidates to maintain a covert position within 15 meters of a trained counter-surveillance team for 72 hours. 3 full days, without moving more than necessary to eat, drink, or attend to bodily functions. The counter-surveillance team was composed of other special forces soldiers, using every detection method available, including thermal imaging. If you were found, you failed. The exercise repeated until you passed, or were removed from the course. This was the institutional heritage that produced the 3 men who crossed that border carrying nothing but notebooks and nerve. Before any of this was possible, these men had to survive something that eliminates the overwhelming majority of those who attempt it. SAS selection begins in the Brecon Beacons of South Wales, some of the most punishing terrain in Western Europe. Candidates march alone across exposed ridgelines above 600 meters, where wind speeds regularly exceed 60 miles per hour. Valleys choked with waist-deep bog. Visibility that can drop to less than 10 meters without warning. In winter, freezing rain. Near-zero visibility fog. No trails. No markers. No encouragement. They carry loads that begin at 25 kilograms and increase to over 30. They navigate by map and compass alone. They do not know the time limits they must meet. They arrive in groups of between 120 and 200, drawn from every regiment and corps in the British Army, the Parachute Regiment, Royal Marines, Infantry, Engineers, Signals, Artillery. Those men have already passed pre-selection fitness standards that would eliminate most special operations candidates worldwide. Those standards are the entry ticket. They mean nothing once selection begins. The directing staff do not motivate, berate, or cajole. They simply record whether the candidate arrived at the checkpoint within the time limit. If he did, he continues. If he didn't, he's gone. The culminating march, known as endurance, or simply the long drag, covers 64 kilometers over the highest peaks of the beacons, carrying approximately 30 kilograms, to be completed in under 20 hours. Alone. In whatever weather the Welsh mountains deliver that day. Since 1960, multiple candidates have died on these marches from hypothermia, heat exhaustion, and falls in poor visibility. By the end of a typical selection cycle, between 85 and 90% of the original intake is gone. A former SAS training officer once described the philosophy in terms that reveal more than any statistic could. They are looking for the man who keeps going when his body has told him to stop, and his mind has agreed. That quality cannot be taught. It can only be discovered. But for this operation, the Hills phase was merely the foundation. The 3 operators had completed continuation training lasting approximately 14 months, covering advanced surveillance techniques, resistance to interrogation, language immersion, jungle warfare in the rainforests of Brunei, demolitions, combat medicine to a level exceeding that of most civilian paramedics, and what the regiment calls environmental adaptation. Environmental adaptation, the process of learning to exist within a foreign culture so convincingly that even people who live there cannot detect the deception. The resistance to interrogation phase alone deserves mention, because it speaks directly to the psychological demands of what these men were about to undertake. During this phase, candidates endure simulated capture and sustained psychological pressure, sleep deprivation lasting over 36 hours, stress positions, sensory deprivation, and interrogation techniques designed to push men to their absolute psychological limits. Some break. Many break. The ones who don't, go on. By the time a man earns his SAS beret, he has acquired a skill set that makes him functionally self-sufficient in any environment on Earth. He can navigate without GPS. He can communicate without satellites. He can gather intelligence without technology. He can survive without resupply. The entire philosophy is built on a single assumption. Everything will go wrong. The operator must be capable of completing the mission anyway. The operation itself has never been officially acknowledged by the British government. It is referenced only obliquely in accounts from intelligence professionals who were aware of its existence. It took place during a period when the Middle East's intelligence landscape was being reshaped by threats that conventional military force simply could not address. Networks of weapon smugglers, financiers, and trained operatives were moving across borders with a fluency that confounded the technological surveillance apparatus of multiple Western and regional intelligence services. The target was not a bomb maker. He was not a trigger man. He was something the intelligence community considers even more valuable, a logistics coordinator. A man who arranged the movement of materials and personnel across borders. Who managed safe houses. Who maintained communication channels between cells operating in different countries. In the language of intelligence analysis, a critical node. A single point whose removal would degrade the capacity of an entire network. Multiple agencies had been tracking him. The Americans had applied signals intelligence, intercepting electronic communications across the region. The Israelis had deployed their own formidable surveillance capabilities through Mossad and military intelligence. The Jordanians had run human agents through the areas where he was believed to operate. All of them had fragments of the picture. None of them had enough to act. The problem was one that technology, for all its extraordinary power, struggles to solve. The target had designed his operational security specifically to defeat electronic surveillance. He never used mobile phones. He communicated exclusively through human couriers. He moved on foot through densely populated urban areas where satellite imagery could track vehicles but could not distinguish one man from 1,000. He changed locations every 24 to 48 hours. He was, in the parlance of intelligence professionals, dark. Invisible to every sensor and signal that modern espionage could deploy. The SAS proposed something that made the intelligence liaisons in the room shift uncomfortably in their chairs. They would send men in on foot. Unarmed. Carrying no equipment that could identify them as military or intelligence operatives. They would live in the city. They would move through its streets as civilians. They would watch, listen, and record. They would build a picture of the target's pattern of life using nothing but human observation, and the kind of patient, granular intelligence gathering that cannot be done from orbit, or through a fiber optic cable. The men selected for the operation were not chosen for their combat skills, though all three possessed those skills at the highest possible level. They were chosen for a completely different set of qualities. Language proficiency. Cultural fluency. The ability to adopt a persona and maintain it under pressure for days and weeks without breaking character. The ability to observe without being observed, to memorize faces, routes, patterns of movement, and reconstruct them in precise detail from memory alone. And above all, the psychological endurance to operate alone in a hostile environment where discovery would mean not a firefight, but a disappearance. No weapons to fight with. No communications equipment to call for help. No quick reaction force staged around the corner. They crossed into their area of operations at dusk, separated, and did not see each other again for 4 days. Each man had a designated sector of the city to cover. Each man had memorized a set of dead drop locations where he could leave written reports for collection by a local asset cultivated over months by the Secret Intelligence Service. Each man had a cover story constructed with painstaking attention to detail, backstopped by documentation that would withstand casual inspection. For the first 3 days, they observed the city. They mapped its rhythms. The time the markets opened. The routes that delivery trucks followed. The patterns of movement in different neighborhoods at different hours. They ate where locals ate. They prayed when locals prayed. They walked at the pace of men with nowhere important to be. They identified the locations where men gathered to talk in low voices and then dispersed. They noted buildings where curtains were drawn during daylight hours. where visitors arrived on foot and left by different routes, where the normal pulse of civilian life was disrupted by the subtle signatures of clandestine activity. Each operator maintained a mental catalogue of faces, correlating them with locations and times, building a web of associations that existed nowhere but inside his own skull. There were no encrypted databases to store this information. No secure laptop to cross-reference sightings. The human brain was the only data processing system available. And these men had trained their memories to function with a precision that most people would find difficult to believe. During continuation training, operators practice a discipline called Kim's Game, named after the intelligence training exercise in Rudyard Kipling's novel, where they are shown a tray of objects for a brief period and must recall every item in exact detail. The exercise scales in complexity until operators can enter a room, spend 30 seconds observing it, and then reconstruct its entire contents, the number and position of every person, every piece of furniture, every weapon, every visible document, with near photographic accuracy. This is not a parlor trick. It is a survival skill. Because in the field, writing things down creates evidence that can compromise you if you are searched. Day 4, the courier. On the fourth day, one of the operators identified a courier. He recognized the man not by his face, which had never appeared in any intelligence file, but by his behavior. The courier moved through the city with a specific pattern of counter-surveillance that the SAS operator recognized instantly from his own training. The man doubled back on his route. He paused at intersections to check reflections in shop windows. He varied his walking speed at irregular intervals. These were not the habits of a civilian going about his daily business. These were the habits of a man who had been trained to detect surveillance. And the very fact that he was employing those techniques marked him as someone worth following. The operator followed him for 6 hours, across 11 kilometers of urban terrain, without being detected. He did this on foot, maintaining a distance that varied between 50 and 200 meters, using the crowds and the architecture of the city as concealment. He never made direct eye contact. He never walked directly behind the courier for more than 30 seconds at a time. He used a technique the SAS had refined over decades in Belfast, where following a target through streets filled with sympathizers who would report any suspicious behavior required a level of skill that bordered on artistry. The technique involved multiple changes of appearance, as simple as removing a jacket or putting on a hat, combined with an intimate knowledge of urban geometry that allowed the operator to predict where the target would emerge from a side street, and position himself there before the target arrived. The courier led him to a building. The operator noted the address, the number of entrances, the windows, the patterns of foot traffic around it. He withdrew. He left a report at a dead drop. The report was 14 pages of handwritten notes, including detailed sketches of the building, the surrounding streets, estimated distances, and a timeline of the courier's movements accurate to the minute. Days 5 through 9, closing the net. Over the following 7 days, the 3 operators converged their efforts on the network surrounding that building. They identified 6 individuals who visited it on a rotating schedule. They mapped the courier routes that connected it to other locations across the city. They built a pattern of life analysis so detailed they could predict which individuals would arrive on which days, at what times, by what routes. On the 9th day, one of the operators observed a man arriving at the building who matched the physical description of the primary target. The description had come from a human intelligence source and included specific identifying features that could not be verified from satellite imagery or electronic surveillance. The operator confirmed the identification visually, from a distance of approximately 40 meters, seated at a tea stall across the street, holding a glass of mint tea, displaying no more interest in the building than any other patron in the establishment. He left a report that night. The report contained the target's confirmed location, his observed pattern of movement, the security measures around the building, and a detailed assessment of how and when a capture or strike operation could be executed, with the highest probability of success and the lowest risk of civilian casualties. The intelligence was transmitted through secure channels to London. From London, it was shared through established liaison mechanisms with partner agencies. The quality of that reporting was itself a signature. Intelligence professionals can recognize the work of a trained observer the way a musician recognizes a fellow professional's technique. The granularity of detail. The disciplined separation of fact from inference. The comprehensive mapping of a network that had been invisible for over a year. All of it spoke to a level of tradecraft that commanded immediate attention. And that is when the phone rang. The Mossad officer who reviewed the intelligence was not a desk analyst. He was a senior operations officer, with decades of experience running agents in some of the most hostile environments on Earth. He understood with a professional's eye exactly what the report represented. 3 men, unarmed, with no electronic support, had penetrated a city that his own service had been targeting for over a year. They had identified a target that had defeated the combined surveillance capabilities of multiple agencies. They had done it through pure human tradecraft, the oldest, most demanding, most irreplaceable form of intelligence collection in existence. What struck the Israeli officer was not just the result. It was the method. The patience. The willingness to spend days doing nothing but watching and waiting. The capacity to operate without the electronic lifelines that modern intelligence services had come to depend upon. And the sheer nerve of walking into denied territory carrying nothing, absolutely nothing, that could protect you if things went wrong. Israel's own intelligence tradition was built on similar principles. Sayeret Matkal, the IDF's premier special reconnaissance unit, had been modeled directly on the SAS when it was established in 1957. Soldiers who complete Sayeret Matkal training are to this day presented with a book written by the SAS founder. The two organizations shared not just a philosophical lineage, but a deep professional respect reinforced through decades of informal exchange and cooperation. Mossad itself had developed extraordinary capabilities in human intelligence. Its operational arm housed an elite group responsible for the most sensitive and dangerous operations in the Israeli intelligence arsenal. These were not people who were easily impressed by the work of foreign services. They had conducted operations of breathtaking audacity across multiple continents, from tracking and eliminating Black September operatives across Europe after the 1972 Munich massacre, to penetrating enemy states that had seemed impervious to outside intelligence. But the SAS operation represented something the Israelis recognized, and valued, precisely because it aligned with a capability they themselves prized above all others. The ability to gather intelligence through human presence in denied areas where technology is blind. The Israelis understood from their own hard experience that there exists a category of intelligence problem where no satellite, no drone, no signals intercept platform can substitute for a trained human being, sitting in a tea shop, watching a doorway, counting faces, building a picture one patient observation at a time. The meeting, when it took place, was held at a location that has never been disclosed. The British sent 2 of the 3 operators who had conducted the mission, accompanied by a senior intelligence officer from the Secret Intelligence Service. The Israelis sent a delegation that included representatives from both Mossad and military intelligence. The meeting lasted, according to accounts from individuals who were aware of its occurrence, the better part of 2 days. What was discussed remains classified. But the after-effects were observable to those within the special operations and intelligence communities of both nations. Training exchanges between the SAS and Israeli Special Forces units, which had existed in various forms for years, took on an entirely new dimension. Personnel from both sides spent time at each other's facilities. The SAS facility at Pontrilas in Herefordshire, where close target reconnaissance and covert surveillance techniques were taught, hosted visitors whose nationalities were not recorded in any official log. In return, British personnel observed Israeli methods at installations whose locations remain among the most closely guarded secrets in the Middle East. The Israelis brought their own extraordinary expertise to the exchange. Their Mista'arvim units, operatives specifically trained to assimilate among Arab populations using disguise and cultural fluency as their primary weapons, represented a parallel tradition of human infiltration developed under the pressures of a nation surrounded by hostile neighbors since 1948. The Israeli approach to undercover urban operations, born from decades of operating in the West Bank, Gaza, and across enemy borders, offered perspectives that complemented and enriched the British methodology. Both traditions recognized the same fundamental truth: in denied territory, the human operator is the ultimate intelligence platform, irreplaceable by any technology yet invented. The exchange also illuminated the differences between the two systems. The SAS drew its operators from men who had typically served 6 to 10 years in the conventional military before attempting selection. They were mature, experienced soldiers who brought a depth of operational judgment that comes only from years of progressive responsibility. Sayeret Matkal, by contrast, recruited 18-year-old conscripts who volunteered directly into the unit and were shaped from the ground up through approximately 20 months of intensive training. The Israeli model produced operators of remarkable skill and audacity at a younger age. The British model produced operators with a broader base of experience, and crucially, for the kind of operation that had prompted this meeting, a capacity for independent judgment that no training syllabus alone could manufacture. Neither approach was superior. Both produced men capable of extraordinary feats. But each had something to teach the other, and both sides were wise enough to recognize it. The deeper significance of this operation lay in what it demonstrated about the enduring value of human capability in an age of technological saturation. It was a lesson that cut against the grain of every procurement decision, every budget allocation, every institutional incentive that shaped how Western nations prepared for conflict. All the money. All the satellites. All the signals intelligence platforms and drone feeds and fiber optic intercepts. And 3 men with notebooks found what all of it could not. The SAS had been building that human capability for over 60 years. From the deserts of North Africa to the jungles of Malaya, to the streets of Belfast, to the mountains of Afghanistan and the cities of Iraq, the regiment had accumulated an institutional knowledge of covert human operations that no budget could purchase and no training program of finite duration could reproduce. It was embedded in the selection process, which identified the specific type of individual capable of functioning under extreme isolation and psychological stress. It was embedded in the continuation training that built skills over months and years rather than weeks. It was embedded in the regimental culture, one that valued patience, self-reliance, and operational austerity as virtues rather than limitations. David Sterling called it the philosophy of the grueling approach. It meant accepting personal hardship, physical discomfort, extreme risk, and operational austerity, in exchange for the one advantage that no amount of money or technology could provide: the ability to be present where the enemy believed no one could be. To see what satellites could not see. To hear what microphones could not hear. To understand, through patient human observation, what no algorithm could compute. The Mossad officer who made that phone call understood this. He understood it because his own organization was built on the same philosophical foundation. The belief that in the final analysis, intelligence is a human enterprise, conducted by human beings, against human beings, in environments where the decisive advantage belongs not to the side with the most expensive equipment, but to the side with the most capable, the most patient, and the most relentlessly trained individuals. 3 men walked into a hostile city carrying nothing but their training. They found a target that had defeated the combined intelligence capabilities of multiple nations. They did it without weapons. Without electronics. Without any of the technological advantages that modern military and intelligence organizations consider indispensable. And when they were done, one of the most capable intelligence services on Earth wanted to know how. The answer was not a technology. It was not a technique that could be written in a manual and distributed to other units. It was a system that had been refining itself since 1941. A system that began with a man on a hospital bed in Cairo, sketching an idea for a small unit of exceptional individuals, and evolved across more than 6 decades of continuous warfare into something that defied easy categorization. They didn't bring weapons because weapons were not the point. The point was presence. The point was patience. The point was the ability to exist in a space where the enemy believed existence was impossible, and to watch, and to wait, and to see what no one else could see. 3 men. 2 notebooks. 1 camera hidden inside a cigarette packet. And an intelligence product that made one of the most formidable agencies in the world pick up the phone, and say 3 words that, in the world of espionage, constitute the highest form of professional respect. We need to talk. If you found this video valuable, and I hope you did, then please hit that like button right now. It takes 2 seconds and it genuinely helps this channel reach more people who love British military history. Subscribe to British Military Chronicles if you haven't already. We go deep on the operations, the units, and the individuals that shaped modern warfare and intelligence. Every week. And if you want to know which SAS operation I think fundamentally changed the way Western Special Forces approach urban environments, that video is right here. Watch it next. Thank you for being part of this channel. I'll see you in the next one.